Hi everyone, today I'm gonna do my birth story video sort of thing. Sorry about the light, it's going everywhere so you can see lines across my face and all of that, but grab your water, grab a cup of tea, grab a coffee, whatever it is that you're drinking, because it's gonna be a long one. I've got some notes and I want to go through everything, explain everything that happened and all that stuff. It's quite a bit. If you hear noises in the background, I've got the baby behind me. He's actually sleeping right now, so hopefully he's not gonna wake up. We'll see. Here's my baby with all his hair that he came out. He was sleeping, so he's waking up now a little bit, but here he is. So I wanted to, if he looks at you guys maybe, but there he is. But I'm gonna start because it's gonna be quite long, so I'll move around so the lines are not in the way, but whatever. The story starts on the Thursday and I had my baby on the Saturday, but the story starts Thursday 2 a.m. That's when I had my first contraction. I woke up in the middle of the night to pee, as you do when you're pregnant. I had a contraction. I didn't wake up my husband because I would, I didn't know if it was a proper contraction or if it was gonna continue, if it was gonna be, one every hour, whatever it is. They tell you to go in when you have 3 contractions in 10 minutes. So I was like, it's 2 a.m. I think we need sleep. So I went back to sleep. I woke up a couple times with contractions, maybe like 3 or 4 contractions that night. But the following day, I didn't actually have any contractions until like 1 p.m. or so. And consistent, and when I say consistent, it's more frequent, from about 4 p.m. or so. But they were still quite irregular, so coming, 1 every 10 minutes, 1 every 15, every 20, 25, maybe 1 every 7. It was a bit all over the place, but I had contractions since then. They were quite painful and long, so I was doing my breathing, I had my TENS machine on and all that stuff. But some of them were about 2 to 3 minutes in length, and that's quite long. I looked it up on Google and it said, they have to be 60 to 90 seconds in length. So I was a bit like, oh, they're super long. But whenever we called the hospital and told them, they were like, oh yeah, that's normal because they're irregular. Until you have 3 in 10, it could happen, that you have contractions for a few days, whatever it is. That night, I continued having contractions, so I didn't sleep at all that night. And Monday or morning of Friday, the 4th, I had a bit of my mucus blood come in. So when I wiped, I had a bit of blood and a bit of that mucus feeling thing. But I was getting worried and I kind of used that as an excuse to call the doctors and be like, oh, I had some blood, can I be checked? They dismissed you quite quickly, so I was like, oh, I've got some blood, can I be checked? Which was true, although I, kind of thought that it was a mucus plug, but I was like, I'm gonna use this as an excuse to get checked, which you shouldn't need an excuse. You should just be able to say, I want to get checked and get checked. So I went in, they put me on the monitor, and here's the first sign of what happened later. But every few minutes, the alarm on the monitor would come up and it would say elevated fetal heart rate. And the midwife came in and she was like, oh yeah, that's normal, happens all the time. See, the heart rate's lowering now, so you're fine. And it would come up every few minutes and she'd be like, yeah, it's normal. Doctor came in, she checked me internally and she said, oh, your cervix is closed. And I was like, oh. And that crushed my soul, to be honest, because I had been contracting for about 24 hours at that point. So I didn't expect to be far along, but 1 centimeter, something happening. But she was like, your cervix is closed. I was a bit shocked and I was like, okay, crushed my soul because I'm in pain, having contractions every 10-15 minutes at that point, and nothing's happened. So they sent me home and I kept having contractions at home. They kept getting worse, still irregular, 10-15 minutes. Sometimes I'll get closer to like 7 minutes and then I'll have like a 15-minute interval and whatnot. I was exhausted. I was vomiting from the pain and my body was shaking, I think, from the exhaustion. Like at that point I hadn't slept for 2 nights really, and yeah, it was a bit too much. So I was getting a bit annoyed with the pain and me not being able to cope with it really. I knew that I wasn't, far along. I wanted to get checked again. At this point it was like 10 p.m. I wanted to get checked again and see if I had progressed anything, if my cervix had, opened up any distance, whatever it is, because otherwise I was gonna be like, what is happening? I was getting worried that some of my contractions were super long, like 2-3 minutes, and very painful. And to me, something was wrong, something was not right. I wanted to get checked. I wanted to, get checked again and go to the hospital. We called a few times, or I made my husband call because I literally couldn't speak through contractions and I was in so much pain. I made him call a couple times because at first they were like, oh yeah, it's normal. And then I made him call and say, you know, I want to get some pain relief. What can I do? And they said, well, the only thing we can give you is pethidine, which initially I wanted to avoid because it's an opioid. It can go, it transfers through the placenta, so it can get to your baby and all that stuff, and I wanted to avoid it, but it's the only option. They said to take paracetamol, but I took it, did nothing as expected. So they said that's the only thing they could give me, so I was like, okay, I'm gonna go in, get checked, see if I can get that pain relief, because at that point, I didn't know how I was gonna be able to continue with the pain and the exhaustion. Like, I didn't know that was gonna be me for the next 2 days. I didn't know how I was gonna be able to deliver a baby in that, you know, mindset of I'm so tired, I literally cannot function. So I went in, they checked me internally again, and they said that I was 2 centimeters dilated, so I was quite happy that stuff was happening and that I was progressing slowly, but I was getting there. I asked when is the earliest that I could get an epidural, and they said 4 centimeters, so I was like, okay, not there yet. So they said the only thing they could do was give me pethidine, so for that I had to stay overnight, and because it was nighttime, my husband couldn't stay, so he had to go home, and I was like, I mean, at this point, don't mind, I want to get, you know, some pain relief. So they sent me to a room. Usually they put you in the ward, but the ward was completely full, so they put me in my own room, which for me was great. And they give you 2 injections. One is the pethidine, and the second one is like an anti-sickness medication, because the pethidine can make you throw up, so they give you anti-sickness. So they give you 2 injections. Literally went to the toilet to pee, and as I was walking back to the room, I was already feeling a bit dizzy. They said for some people it helps, for some others it doesn't with the pain. But what it does is it makes you a bit drowsy, so you do get some sleep. And at that point, I was like, that's what I need. I need to sleep, because otherwise I'm not going to be able to do this much longer. So they gave me that, I fell asleep, and then, you know, woke up a couple of times to pee in the night and all that, but I was so much better and felt so much better that I was able to sleep, and with that I was able to continue a bit more. So I stayed in that room the full day the following day, and about 4 or 5 p.m. or so, the midwife came in and she said, oh, how do you feel about going home? And I didn't feel like I wanted to go home, because I had asked for another pethidine injection and that had helped. So I was like, I don't know how I can go home, and I know that I can progress faster at home, but I'm not gonna have any pain relief, and that I'm really struggling with that at that point. They didn't want to check me internally again until I had 3 contractions every 10 minutes, because they said, you know, there's risk of infection every time we go in and check, so we don't want to do it until you're 3 and 10. And I was like, okay, frustrating, because I don't know how much I'm progressing, but okay. So I was like, I want to stay in. So at 8 p.m. Visiting hours end, so my husband would have to go home. So we started doing a lot of trying to get my contractions to come in faster, so a lot of bouncing on the yoga ball and a lot of walking down the corridor, like up and down the corridor, back and forth, to the point that I actually started getting contractions every 3 to 4 minutes. Very consistently for like an hour and a half or so. The midwife came in to check the heart rate of the baby, which she had done a couple times throughout the day, and she notices that the baby's heart rate is elevated. So she says, oh, I'm gonna call in the doctors to see what they think. So she calls in, 2 doctors come in literally not even 5 minutes after she says that she's gonna call them, and they have a look at the monitor for like 10 seconds, and they're like, okay, we're gonna bring you up to the delivery suite, so we can put you on the monitor and just, you know, monitor you, because the heart rate is quite elevated. It was over 200 per minute, so very elevated. Not mine, just the baby's. I was completely fine. So we're gonna bring you up to delivery suite to monitor you, so we're gonna keep you in. And I was like, okay. So I walked over there to the other floor, whatever it was at that point, and at this point I was like, I really need to pee. So I was asking, can I please go to the bathroom? And they're like, no, we need to put you on the monitor. And I said, well, I really need to pee. Can I just, you know, it's a minute, I'll just be a minute. And they were like, no. They didn't say no, but they kept saying, you know, we're very worried, we want to have you on the monitor. If you go to the bathroom, we can't have you on the monitor. So they were saying no, but not with the word no. And I was like, but, you know, I felt like my bladder was about to burst. So I was like, I need to do something about this. So they gave me like a little pan to pee while I was sitting on the bed with 3 people in the room. So I was like, I don't think I can do this. So they said the other option you have is we can give you like a temporary catheter. So we put it in, bladder empties, we take it out. And I was like, okay, let's do that, because I really need the bathroom. At this point, I think the lady thought I was stupid and whatever, but you know, that's what I needed. They said they wanted to break my waters first, because obviously if the heart rate is elevated, one of the things that it could be is that baby has had a poo inside, so meconium could be in the waters, and that can cause infection and other problems. So they wanted to check that it wasn't that. So they checked me internally again. This was the same doctor that sent me home the first night, the doctor that told me that I hadn't dilated at all and my cervix was closed. This was the same doctor. So she checked me again and she said that I was 3 centimeters dilated. So I had progressed a little bit, but not much. And she broke my waters and they were completely clear. So they were like, okay, it's not that. At this point, I had already asked for an epidural, and the anesthetist came in and he was explaining the epidural stuff to me and all that stuff. And I was like, okay, yeah, I want to do that. He didn't want to do it until they checked if the heart rate was, you know, until the doctors were happy with the heart rate stuff. He said, I want to wait until that to give it to you. At that point, I'm fine to do it. I think he knew what was about to happen. Because I said yes to the epidural, and with an epidural, they put you in a catheter anyway. Instead of doing the temporary one, they said, we'll just give you the, like, permanent one. And I said, okay, that's fine. So they put it in. At this point, the internal examination was so painful that I had gas and air. And gas and air, I hated it. I hated gas and air. It made me feel like I was about to faint in literally 10 seconds. Like I had about 5 puffs of it, and I feel like I was about to faint. The good thing about gas and air is that after you've exhaled it, it kind of, you know, exits your body. It doesn't have like side effects and that kind of thing. Goes in, goes out, you're fine again. But having a few puffs of it, it makes you go like so funny. Like I thought, you know, my vision was going, I was about to faint. And I fainted before, so I know the feeling of it. But I was having it during the examination and putting the catheter in because I was in a lot of pain. And also at this point, I did have contractions every 3 minutes. So throughout all of this, I'm having contractions every 3 minutes. So she puts in the catheter and about 1.5 liters of pee comes out. So she was like, oh my God, like she really did have to go to the toilet. Like her face was just like, wow. Like she looked at the other lady like, oh my God. At this point, I don't think I said, but at this point I had that doctor and 2 midwives, one of them being a lead midwife, 2 doctors, and the anesthetist. I say that word awful and wrong, but you know what I mean. And that guy in the room. My husband told me this, but the lead midwife was a bit annoyed with the doctor that was checking me, that checked me the night that my cervix was closed, the morning that my cervix was closed, because she was checking that, you know, the graph thing that comes out when they put you on the monitor from that morning. And because the heart rate was elevated at that point, she said that she wouldn't have sent me home when they did. She would have put me on the monitor longer. So she was annoyed at that lady that she had sent me home. Again, I didn't notice any of this, my husband did, but you know, because he was just sat there next to me the whole time. So they put the catheter in, waters were clear, so they're like, okay, what could it be? So they thought that it could be, what else could it be? And they said it could be that his umbilical cord is around his neck. At this point, I'm not in the conversation, basically. I've got the doctor here, my husband here, they're having this conversation. So he's saying that, and my husband's like, okay, so what happens next? And he says cesarean. And I was like, okay. At that point, I wasn't super concerned because I had heard that elevated heart rate for the baby could mean cesarean, like C-section. I had read that before. So the first time they said about the heart rate, I was like, oh my God, okay, I might end up with a C-section. But I thought, you know, I had more time. So he said, okay, what's next? And he said cesarean. And my husband said, when would that be? And the doctor said, now. And literally, as soon as he said now, they started moving my bed towards theater. So happened very fast. I was a bit scared. And when I say a bit, I mean a lot. I was quite scared at that point because it all happened super fast. I didn't really have a say, and not that I would have chosen anything differently because they know that something's wrong. They don't know what it is, but baby's, you know, life could be at risk. So whatever they have to do, just go and do it, sort of thing. They told my husband to go and get changed into scrubs, so he went in. So they're rolling me in to theater. At this point, I didn't even know like how far away that was, but it was actually quite close to it. And one of the midwives is telling me, or a doctor, I don't know who she was telling me all the risks of having a C-section, which is not a nice thing to be telling you, all the things that they say. So yeah, and she said, do you verbally consent to this? Because we're gonna give you a paper to sign, but if we don't have time for that, then I'll consent you. And I was like, yeah, fine, do whatever you have to do, sort of thing. So she was telling me all these things as I was getting rolled in. They also said if they don't have time to do the spinal, or they're not able to do it, because at this point they don't give you an epidural for an emergency C-section, they give you a spinal, which is very similar, but it's a lot faster. So that's why the guy wanted to wait for the epidural, because if they give you the epidural, I think it takes about 20 minutes or so to actually do anything and to have any effect, but the spinal just, you know, knocks you out in like 5 minutes, sort of thing. And they said if they couldn't give me that, they would put me under general anesthetic, which freaked me out. That freaked me out massively. I've never had surgery before in my life, and I've always been really scared of, you know, being asleep while they're doing things to me. So when they said, you know, that's an option, I was like, okay, no, I need to avoid that. Like, do whatever it is so that I don't get general anesthetic, because that would, yeah, that would be the most awful thing. Also, just imagine, and I'm sure it's happened to people before, and you know, I feel for them, because the thought of going to sleep and waking up and your baby just being there, and just kind of, you know, removing yourself from the whole situation just freaked me out quite a bit. So they roll me in, I'm moving from one bed to another, they're, you know, making me shuffle from one place to another, and I'm like, oh my god, I'm pulling my catheter, like it's quite painful, and they're like not listening, and I'm like, I'm pulling my catheter, and they like moved it a bit, and I was like, thank you. Like at that point they don't really think about you as much, if that makes sense. Like they're there to do their job, they're not there to make you comfortable, if that makes sense. Not that I was trying to be, you know, comfortable, but you know what I mean. They initially said with the epidural, you know, if I had any contractions, to let them know, they'll stop, wait for me, and all that. Of course, I want to have a contraction while they're doing the spinal. They did not really care. They did it anyway. So I got super freaked out, because that's one of the things that always freaked me out about the epidural, was moving while they're putting it in. Yeah, I was like, please be a statue right now. Do not move a single bit. And they did it anyway. On that, I'll say, you usually have to consent. So they brought me the paper to consent for the cesarean. Signed that. Don't know what I signed. I just think I did a line or whatever it was. For the anesthetic, they consented me to it. So he said that because I had consented to the epidural, and the epidural is actually more invasive than the spinal. So the spinal has a smaller needle and it just is less invasive. I don't know. That he consented me because I consented to the epidural. So because that was less invasive, he was like, I'm happy to just consent you to it. So they did it, and within 5 minutes, basically, or less than 5 minutes actually, I was feeling like my legs were heavier and all that stuff. And it freaked me out that I could like move my toes. The guy said, can you lift your leg? And I was like, no. But I was like, but I can move my toes. And he was like, yeah, that's normal. He had to pinch me for me to make sure, like for me to like trust him that I wasn't gonna feel any pain, because I kept saying, but I can move my toes. And he was like, yeah, that's fine. But in my mind I was like, how is it possible that you're gonna literally open me up while I can move my toes? They do like a cold spray on you, so they spray on your arm and they're like, can you feel it? And you're like, yes. And then they do it on like your body. You're like, can you feel the cold? You're like, no. You can feel it going on you, so you can feel that something has been sprayed on you, but you cannot feel the cold. And apparently that's, you know, what it takes. They open me up, they put up like a screen in front of you so you don't see what's happening. But the weird thing is that you don't feel any pain, but you can feel people pulling and doing things on you, which is very weird sensation. They said it's like doing the dishes, like someone's doing the dishes inside of you, and that's literally what it feels like. And at one point I just asked the guy, like, have they opened me up yet? And he said, yeah, they've done that for a while, like, you've been open for a while. And I was like, oh, okay. And literally within 10 minutes, they had taken the baby out. So we heard a little cry, just like, you know, not like that, like an actual cry. We heard the cry, and they lower the screen, they like show you the baby, and then they take him to like get checked and all that stuff. So at that point I told my husband, go follow the baby, leave me alone, go with the baby. They moved the screen a little bit so I could see the baby from the corner with my husband and all that, so he was able to cut the cord. And obviously I wasn't able to do skin to skin, which I really wanted to do, but they brought me the baby a few minutes after that. I think from the photos it was like 4 minutes or 7 minutes after he was born. They brought him to me, put him on top of me, and we got a few photos and that kind of thing. I did skin to skin after in the recovery room, which is, you know, not what I wanted, but at that point I was just happy that he was fine, he was healthy and all that stuff. And then they take another like 30 to 40 minutes to like close you up, so you're just there while they're closing you up, feeling all the stuff that they're doing to you and all that stuff. And when they're done, they roll you into like a ward, which is the recovery ward, I guess. You're there, I think from the photos and like the timings on the photos, it was like 4 to 5 hours, because I guess anything that could happen after the C-section is more likely to happen straight after, like any complications. So they keep you under the monitor for those hours. My husband was able to stay there, but at this point it was like 1 a.m. So when they rolled me to the actual ward, he had to go home. He couldn't stay. He couldn't even help me like get things from the bags and that kind of thing, which I had earplugs that I really wanted to have, because they said bring earplugs because there's always someone who snores on the ward. And yes, lady next to me snoring the whole night, couldn't even get my earplugs out because I didn't want to, you know, call a midwife to make her go through all my bags to find my earplugs. Also, the people at the night shift were a bit not great, so I kept calling them and they took like 30 minutes to come in, 40 minutes to come in. Sometimes they'll come in and say, oh yeah, the midwife will be with you in a second, never turn up, like never call them sort of situation. So it was quite frustrating because you still have the catheter in, so, and they put you on like this compression thing in your leg so you don't get deep vein thrombosis or whatever it is. They put you on this thing that just makes noise every couple minutes, and you still have the catheter in. The catheter, they took it out the following day at like midday or so. And one of the requirements for you to go home, and initially they said that I was going to stay in for 2 nights, but I actually only stayed 1 night. One of the requirements is for you to pee over 200 ml. So the following morning, they, like I said, around midday or so, they took out my catheter, called the midwife because they have to help you up to go to the toilet and that stuff to make sure that, you know, you can walk properly and all that stuff after the operation. And let me tell you, peeing after the catheter is the weirdest thing ever, because it's only been in for like 12 hours or so, but you forget how to pee, like your body forgets. So I just sat there like, is it gonna happen? Like trying to push it out, but it was just not coming out until it did. And I did 300 ml, so I was clear to, you know, potentially go home whenever I had to. And that evening they came in and they said, how do you feel about going home? And you know, in terms of pain and all that, I was still in quite a bit of pain. I was very uncomfortable, but I didn't want to go another night without my husband there, because obviously the first night couldn't get up and that stuff. Second night I could get up, but it was still very painful, very uncomfortable, and I knew that, you know, people took ages to come in. If the baby's crying forever, because I'm not able to like lift him from the bed, or I would have to get up and, you know, walk around to lift him. So the uncomfortability, if that's a word, of having to deal with that for me was worse than just dealing with pain at home. So I said, yes, send me home if you can. So we went home that night and that was it really. Recovery has been interesting. First 5 days, quite bad, couldn't really get out of bed. Days 5 to 10, much better. Now tomorrow's day 15, so tomorrow my baby's gonna be 2 weeks. Much, much better. I can get up, I can do things, I feel like, you know, I can move around and that sort of thing, which is, you know, ideal. So in terms of my experience, it was very, very scary, let me tell you that. Like, I've never been more scared in my life, but I'm very happy that everything was fine in the end. And, you know, the only thing for now, recovery's been difficult, but it's not been awful. The only thing is now, you know, if I'm able to, if I want to, and I'm able to have kids in the future, I'm gonna have to think about whether I want a C-section or have my baby naturally. I'm not able to go to a birthing center anymore, and actually I haven't said, but the birthing center was closed, so I couldn't have had my water birth anyway. Universe. I'm not able to do a water birth in the future. I'm not able to go to a birthing center in the future just because I've had a C-section before, so I'm now sort of at risk in that sense. But they've said that I'm fine to have a natural birth after my C-section, but obviously there's more risks involved with that. So it's, you know, I'm gonna have to think in the future, what do I want to do? So that's, you know, the only thing that's gonna affect me in the future in terms of, you know, having other kids. I need to think about whether I want to do more videos about this, because I know it's great to put out very positive birth experiences on the internet, but also I would have liked to read more about emergency C-sections. Emergency C-sections are one of those things that people don't really want to talk about because it's not necessarily positive, like it's quite scary. It's not traumatic now, like I don't feel like I've had trauma. At the time it was quite traumatic, and like I said, I was very scared. I've never been more scared in my life. It's all because it was happening so fast. I think if I had time to process it, I would have been fine, and you know, to have a C-section, like I would have been fine to think about it and process it. And I knew it was potentially a thing that could happen to me, but it's the something's happening we're not happy with, or you're having a C-section, you're having it now, 10 minutes later you're in the getting your body opened up sort of situation that I didn't really know how to process in the moment. And again, it's all fine, it's all, you know, my baby's healthy, I'm healthy, we're all fine, it's all good. So I'm happy with how it's been, not really, but you know what I mean, like I'm happy with the outcome of it, so I'm not in trauma that all of this has happened to me. So it's not like a negative experience, but at the time it was, like, let me tell you. But I do feel like I want to talk about it more and potentially talk more about the experience and what happens step by step, because more things happen, but I've, you know, summarized it throughout the emergency C-section, and also like recovery and things like that, like what is it like, explain a bit more about it, just because I would have liked to hear more about it when I was pregnant. And I just felt like one of those things where people talk about elective C-sections and unplanned C-sections, but emergency C-sections are seen as like a rare thing that barely happens, but it can happen. So if you want to know about it, you should be able to read about it and know about it and hear about it and that sort of thing. But yeah, any question that you guys have, please let me know in the comments, and I'll definitely do a video answering those questions. But for now, I hope you enjoyed my story time about my birth, and I will see you guys later with another video. Bye!